All right, thanks very much, Derek. Am I on? Say yes, Calvin. So I tell my students every day, so difficult to get out of the habit. Apologies out of the way first. I am both an academic and an economist. And there's a reason why they call economics dismal science. But I'm going to try and get the dismal stuff out of the way first, and then talk a little more about how Welsh businesses, Welsh organisations more generally, not just necessarily for profit businesses, can lever events in order to improve their business, improve their prospects, profitability, viability. And to do that, I'm not going to talk much about major events towards the end of my presentation, but I'll start off just by kind of thinking about some of the issues that face us in a region which is very good at major events. You must forget that Wales is extremely good and punches way above its weight in terms of tracking major events. So, death by PowerPoint. 4 challenges. First challenge is, and this has already been hinted at quite a lot by Joe earlier, if we are going to lever sustainable benefits from major events, then we have to change them. Because at the moment, events are about these sorts of things. They're about media coverage, visitation, tourism, if you're lucky, a bit of business investment, and of course associated retail and other services. Meanwhile, if you talk to any regional development-related academic worth his salt, he will tell you that the things on the right are what matter for regional prospects in terms of economic development in the medium and longer term. So you can attract spending in the short term, you can attract visitation in the short term. What you need are things like innovation, the reason we're here tonight, the knowledge economy, whatever that means, high value employment that we already heard Joe mention, virtual infrastructure, broadband, e-business techniques which are cutting edge on the part of your regional businesses, skills which already we've mentioned, partnerships which have developed as part of events in Cardiff, for example, and learning. And the problem is that for the most part, these two things are quite separate, with the exception of, innovative things going on at the edges, the sports city development, for example, in East Manchester, trying to develop, the kind of Olympic science around the stadium kind of area, East Manchester, City of Manchester Stadium. But generally, what we think matters for regional development, for prospects for our region, for us to push up that 74% GVA towards 80, 85, are not what we get from events. At least not what we get from events as a matter of course. And that's an issue going forward that clearly we have to think about in terms of developing this events business infrastructure, if you like, behind the tourist, that the tourist doesn't necessarily see, getting more of those higher value activities. The problem we have is that those higher value activities are jealously guarded. Whenever you have a major event, mega event, particularly in the area of sport, which involves big international global players, sports governing bodies and organisations, by and large, they don't like letting go the high value stuff. I remember working South Glamorgan County Council and Cardiff County Council when we had the Rugby World Cup. And it was a real education for myself and some other officers, one or two are here tonight, in how hard-nosed Rugby World Cup Rugby World Cup Limited. We thought Paul Forbin was a nice guy. Till we were sitting across the table from him. And he said, you can't do that. You can't link to that website. You can't put that logo on there. And that is typical of the attitude of sports which jealously guard their intellectual property. If you were a guy selling bananas half a mile from a stadium that was a host for the South African World Cup, boot, out you go for the duration. Those sorts of commercial issues, commercial sensitivities, can hinder our ability to move up that value chain. It's really interesting. Apparently, LOCOG, the London Organisation for the Olympic Games, really wanted Fuller's, a London brewer, to be the official drinks partner for the Olympics. Where's that high jump gone? And IOC said, no, sorry. We've got a relationship with Heineken. Heineken are where it's at. LOCOG have to be subservient in terms of being able to get local partners on. So we need to think about these things when we have this strategy of moving up the value chain, looking for the niches where opportunities do exist. The third challenge, frankly, it's all rather small beer as an economist. In terms of direct spending, is it important? Yes. You know, we've heard about the Ryder Cup. I've got 82 million rather than 84 there, which I think Joe mentioned earlier. The golf tourism about 42 million. We've just done a study for the Ramblers, just finishing now, which suggests that walking and hill walking is 630 million to spend. So notwithstanding the strong growth in golf tourism over the last few years in Wales, it's still less than a tenth of our more traditional kind of non-event-based activities around our kind of traditional focuses in tourism, if you like. And tourism as a whole is worth over 4 billion in terms of spending. And of course, when you're looking for supply chain contract, for example, this matters. It matters because it means that not that many Welsh businesses will be in a position to grab any of this, the money supplying in to these events, notwithstanding, obviously, the ones that Joe mentioned earlier. So there are issues around how big the event sector is compared to the economy as a whole. And, you know, I do my other hat, my PhD is in sort of tourism and sport and stuff. My other hat is in environmental energy economics. And frankly, it's game over anyway with some of this stuff. You know, oil at 122. Economists love a strong signal, right? It's really nice when you've got a strong signal from a market, which is unequivocal, which tells you the way the wind is blowing, and upon which you can make some investment decisions which you know are unlikely to be naysayed by kind of random shifts in the market. And, you know, I mean, all right, you can see, you know, this is where Egypt kicked off. You know, Tunisia, Libya. I've been updating this graph on an almost daily basis, and I just can't be bothered anymore. So it's about a week old. We're at $122 today. But this bit, you know, September 10 to January 11, you go back to, we're at about $80 all the way along this graph. The long-term average price of Brent crude from 1983 to 2003 was $35, inflation adjusted. Okay? So we've got a price which, even before the latest oil shocks kind of crept in the last 6 months, was 2 or 3 times its long-term average. All right? Now, you think about what people use their petrol for. You think about what people use their discretionary spending for. You use it to get to work. You use it to get to shops. If you've got any money left over or petrol left over, you use it to go to do leisure activities like tourism, sports events. So you've got a very challenging environment for major events going forward, if those major events involve a lot of international travel or a lot of long interregional travel. Now, this is not something which is going away. I've got a whole other presentation on this if you want it. I shan't bore you with it right now. So is the implication of this that all this stuff is not worth worrying about? We should forget about events, take that £4.8 million and spend it in the Gurnos, something. No, see, and this is where I kind of have to take off my economist hat for a moment. And put on my tourist hat, if you like. Where was I last weekend? Last weekend I was in Flanders. How many of you go to Belgium on holidays regularly? Good man. Your Dutch would come in handy in Flanders, wouldn't it? Yeah. My Dutch, Flemish has not developed much, unfortunately. 2004 is going 2009 I was going to a conference in Leuven, stopped off on the way to do a cyclist sporty for kind of amateur cycle event on my own. Had a great time, got up most of the hills, slowly. A year later I was back, this time in Liège, kind of other part of Belgium, other side of Brussels, with 3 of my mates, my brother and 2 other mates, doing another different cyclist sporty event for another 3 weeks. This time for a 3-night weekend. Some mate John Fox looking really, really knackered there after I'd roasted him at one of the hills. And then last weekend, where was I? I was at the top of another hill, back in Flanders, back for the Flandrian event again, this time with 6 of us, and another 6 guys from Cardiff at the campsite that we were at. So I'm just the kind of guy that Wales wants. So despite the fact with my economist's head on, I can see this stuff might not actually, you know, mean very much in terms of the numbers. I'm now a very strong advocate. I remember a good friend of mine and Joe's called Tim Beddow, was really into military history. He used to go to Flanders every year, you know. I go to Ypres and a place like this, and I'd be like, you're a nutcase, what are you doing, you know? And now I love the place, just love it. Trying to persuade my wife that we want to go to the Ardennes for a holiday. So I'm just the sort of person that Visit Wales wants, albeit the other way around. And of course, again, as already been mentioned, it's not just about the money, is it? There are loads of ways. There's a Green Man Festival, award-winning festival, Crickhowell in South East Wales, Jarvis Cocker. When you think about the kind of other side of the coin, the benefits, the visibility that Dame Tanya Gray-Thompson's brought for Wales by competing in events around the world. And of course, the way that events are at the heart of and at the vanguard of what we in Wales want to show in terms of how we position ourselves as a sustainable region. So again, it's not just about the money, and it may not be majorly about the money. So the implications for businesses and organisations in Wales. Well, see, I think that the lesson for events is not about the supply chain stuff. It's not necessarily about, for most businesses, selling into the Olympics or selling into the Ryder Cup, notwithstanding the fact that some businesses will do it. Because long-term, mega peripatetic events, the big stuff moves around the world, is a really difficult place to go. Really difficult place to go. We've done it very well in the last 10 years. It's really hard to hang on to that competitive advantage. And I think that it will be difficult to sell to businesses in Wales the idea that you can be part of this huge event. Most businesses in Wales are SMEs. We had a long time to work with businesses, prior to the Ryder Cup, 8 years, not like that for most events. Ryder Cup, you can argue, was more embedded in Wales, to the fact we had the Ryder Cup Wales limited company, chivying business along, and similar stuff happens with the rally, in terms of trying to get the rally to spend more money here. But most businesses will never see that. So do events not matter at all for most businesses as well? I think there's several things you can imagine. For some businesses, even when they're not focusing in as suppliers, events can be a business focus. We did some studies around the Rugby World Cup, and it's a bit difficult because I haven't asked, this was 2001 we did this work, so I haven't asked the gentleman concerned whether I can say this. So a very large Cardiff brewer, who shall remain unnamed by me tonight, said, basically, when the Rugby World Cup was on, we had Foster's down and hosted Foster's, the chief exec of Foster's Group, for a fortnight. Couldn't buy that. And that company just was in the middle of a merger with a smaller brewer, and the Rugby World Cup was a focus, was a lever, was a catalyst for kind of the business strategy, despite the fact that company was not necessarily a direct supplier to, the company's relationship with the event was not necessarily one of a direct supplier. Nonetheless, the event was a catalyst for kind of business strategy development. I think that's quite an important lesson. The second one, I think, is that, 4.8 million quid at a time of austerity is, again, a strong signal. It tells you, yes, that the Welsh Assembly Government cares about events. Events are important. But the major event strategy also tells you what the Welsh Assembly Government thinks about and cares about more generally. And this kind of stuff, which is very explicit in one place in the major event strategy, I think is a really nice synopsis of what the current Welsh Assembly Government and probably the future Welsh Assembly Government thinks matters. If you wanted one page which told you what the priorities were, what the interests were, what the hopes and aspirations were for Welsh Government and by extension for the Welsh people, I guess, this is probably what I'd use. Generically kind of softened, because let's face it, one Wales is a bit of a mess. It doesn't tell you much of anything. But you can see how issues on sustainability, issues on fairness, prosperity and culture are at the heart of the major event strategy and also at the heart of the Welsh Assembly Government. If I was a business looking to lever, support, partnership, develop relationships with the Welsh Assembly Government, then this is exactly what I'd be saying, because this is what matters to them. And that, I think, is a nice, straightforward, BS 8901. This tells us the Welsh Assembly Government cares about sustainability accreditation. And if you're a business which should have sustainability accreditation, then it's likely that in a couple of years, if you want any money from the Assembly Government, you're going to need it. Because it's happening in events now, it's going to happen in other places soon. Moving on a level, if you like, to the kind of community level interests, developments, potential. This is some work, pardon me. This is some work which is undertaken by University of Glamorgan Business School, which I was reading last week, sponsored by the Welsh Government. And, you know, it backs up lots of information and literature which suggests that events are places that people come together to develop sustained networks which are high trust, high value, reciprocal, complex, which develop skills, which enable people to have fun whilst, you know, furthering their personal development, which are important at community level. All this stuff is a place where local business, local organisations should be part of these developing webs, networks, infrastructures. Now, you don't necessarily get a big fat paycheck out of this. You don't necessarily see an immediate return on the bottom line. But when I think about where I want to spend my money, and I suspect when most people think about where they want to spend their money, businesses which engage, truly engage, really engage, you know, don't have to give money, give time. You know, you think about corporate social responsibility, sustainability responsibility, as it's increasingly be called. It's about contributing. And if companies don't have time, they've got money. They've got money. If they don't have money, they've got time, staff time. You know, they can help. And I think that positioning yourself as active participants in these developing local relationships, which are often around events, is a worthwhile pursuit for many companies, social enterprises and other organisations operating at the kind of smaller spatial scales. I mean, it really strikes me that, you know, as the Welsh Assembly kind of runs away from some of these communities necessarily following austerity, and as elite sport, professional sport has become ever more commodified. You know, I used to go watch rugby until they kicked Ponty in the touch, and then I used to go to Bridgend to watch the Warriors and they kicked them at the touch, and I just gave up. And there's a gap now. There's a gap in communities in Wales which could be filled by events and could be filled by events supported very strongly by businesses which are locally embedded. And finally, I think, one of the best things about what I do, I was up in Edinburgh, for example, last year, advising, sounds rather posh and egotistical, talking to the Edinburgh Fringe and other Edinburgh festivals about viability, business strategy, economic impact. And you know what? They're really interesting people with a really interesting and diverse set of views, attitudes, motivations, objectives. They're not accountants. Apologies for any accountants in the audience, but they're not accountants, is what I'm saying. They're not people you usually meet in your day-to-day business. Do Lectures is a really good example of this. Do Lectures is effectively the TED Lectures, which is held in the west coast of America every year. It's small, in a small part of West Wales, and it's about change, about organisational change, societal change, institutional change, attitude change. And, you know, Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet. I'll say that again. Tim Berners-Lee invented the internet, and he was in a field outside Cardiff talking to people for an entire weekend last year. Peter Seeger more or less invented, with a couple of his mates, organic farming, at least in the UK. And he was in the field outside Cardigan talking to people for an entire weekend last year. You cannot buy that sort of interaction any more than you can buy interaction with the head of Foster's. And that is, I think, a way in which events, through offering this focus, this catalyst, can develop business approaches, perspectives, and maybe institutional change. And of course, a lot of you guys know more than me about this, so I think it's your turn to tell us what to do. Thank you.